Mr. Speaker, he's going troppo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Madam Speaker.
Minister has the
The member will resume his seat. The member will leave the chamber under 94A.
And I've got some sitting members who are very busy in Parliament House this week in Canberra, but I've dragged them away from their work so they can talk to you. And you know them well. Keith Wallahan, Liberal member for Menzies, Deputy Chair of the Joint Select Committee on the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice Referendum. Nice to talk again, Keith. Good morning.
You too, Virginia, and good morning to your listeners as well.
And Dr Michelle Anandaraja, who's the Labor member for Higgins. Dr Anandaraja, always nice to talk to you. Good morning.
Morning, Virginia.
And what are the chances the bells are going to ring while we're talking?
No,
Keith,
I think we're okay. We're okay on that front. Yeah, I've got a witness outside just keeping an eye on things.
And I'm looking at Michelle. She gets the memo before I get it.
Okay.
So I'll go when she goes.
I'm waiting for the hand signal to come up.
That's all right. We'll just chat amongst ourselves if you have to go, but we'll get right down to it. First of all, what's top of mind for you this week at the moment, Michelle?
I think housing, Virginia. As you know, yesterday we retabled the Housing Australia Future Fund. I never thought that I would ever see housing become a fault line in this parliament, and yet it has. The Housing Australia Future Fund should not be contentious by any stretch, and especially at a time when we have 122,000 Australians experiencing homelessness. Now, I don't have 10 cities in my electorate, but I certainly do have homeless Australians, and they are there outside supermarkets, and they are there sleeping on footpaths. It does not need to be this way. It is a matter of urgency now that we pass the Greens and the Liberals pass this bill through the upper house, because we can't delay it. Every day of delay means that Australians are being denied $1.3 million that could go towards social and affordable housing. Now, I've heard all the arguments about the Future Fund model being a gamble on the stock exchange, etc., etc. Let me remind listeners that the Australian Future Fund was actually established 17 years ago. It started with $60 billion. It's now over $200 billion, and it was established by the Howard government. And the current chair of the Future Fund is my predecessor, the former member for Higgins, Peter Costello. Keith, you may know him. So I think that it's high time we stop the political games and get on with it and pass this bill.
Keith Wallahan?
Thank you, Virginia. I had 15 listening posts throughout Menzies on last Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 5 each day, and housing and cost of living were the top two issues. On housing, no one discussed this bill because they know it's a bad bill. It's not going to solve the problem. It's not going to touch the edges. And let's remind your listeners what it is. It's a $10 billion fund of borrowed money that will have no guarantee that a single house will be built, no guarantee of a revenue stream. It is not going to fix the serious housing crisis that we do have, and we do acknowledge. A crisis in affordable housing, but also costs of rent and plummeting first home buyer ownership rates.
We hear this argument again and again from the Greens, and it's probably the most effective one, Michelle Anandaraja, that they have, and it's just been quoted there again by Keith Wallahan. No guarantee that one extra house will be built. Is that the problem you've got, from the beginning with the design of this bill, that you decided to focus on a kind of a future fund rather than a directly targeted and applied funding stream for housing construction?
I don't accept that at all. When you look at the history of Australia's future funds, they've been wildly successful. Now, it started with an initial investment of $60 billion. It is now over $200 billion. I'll just jump in there. And annual returns have been 9%.
Wildly successful, yes, in terms of what the fund ended up being. But it's about the application of the fund, and it's about people saying, look, don't just accumulate money for its own sake. Where's the guarantee that it actually goes to doing quickly what you say you want it to do?
Well, it's in the legislation that the Housing Australia Future Fund disbursements will go towards social and affordable housing. And the difference here compared to the previous NRAS, which was a scheme that was abolished by Abbott, is that these houses will remain social and affordable housing in perpetuity. So we will start to build up a stock of housing. And don't forget that this is only one piece of a much broader housing puzzle. There are so many other things that we have introduced. We have injected, as soon as we knew we were going to have a surplus, we provided $2 billion in the social housing accelerator to the states. That money has already gone out the door. Victoria has received $496 million. We've also got the National Housing Accord, which is being led by the Treasurer, an aim to build 1 million homes from 2024. And finally, we've boosted the build-to-rent sector by providing tax incentives, and that's going to, according to the Property Council, result in 150 to 250,000 homes. So a problem of this magnitude, when we have 230,000 households waiting for social housing, that's the wait list currently, means that you have to tackle it with multifaceted solutions. And the most important thing is that you have to engage with all three tiers of government, which is what we have done. The last decade saw the Liberals kick the can down the road, wash their hands of this problem, basically saying that it was not their responsibility and it was all the state's fault. And as a result, we have had a decline in new dwellings since 2016, 2017. And this is the end result. So every lever now must be pulled. Blocking this bill is completely unconscionable in my mind.
Well, I want to hear from Keith. Keith, if the Greens do manage to negotiate some sort of outcome with the government and they end up getting the Greens' support, what, if anything, will your side of politics do? Will you change your position?
If the facts change, you are open to changing your mind. So we'll certainly look at the detail of any changes that occur, and we'll always have an open mind. But there's a bigger picture here, Virginia. We're both members in Melbourne, and all your listeners are from Melbourne. It is a beautiful, livable city, but there is an issue of supply that we need to address. Now, part of that is building more medium-density housing that families can be raised in, but also about population growth. We will have 1.5 million more migrants in 5 years. Now, I'm a migrant. Most of the people in my seat are first or second generation migrants, but we need to talk about whether we are proportionately responding to an increased growth in the population of Melbourne. I don't think that work's being done.
There's a division being called, and I have to go.
I knew this
I would have loved to have taken that on. Sorry, Virginia.
And does that mean Keith has to go too?
No, I don't actually.
Okay, well, Keith, it's all yours. Michelle, pop back if you want to. Michelle Anandaraja will let her go. Labor member for Higgins, who's had to dash off. This is always the challenge when you've got sitting members who join you for the party line and then they have to go. But we've got Keith Wolahan who's joining you. You're welcome to step in. Why don't you step into Michelle Anandaraja's seat? 1300 222 774. Charlie's called in from Carlton. Hi, Charlie. What would you like to say? Go ahead, Charlie.
Hi, VT. Look, I'd like to chime in. I wonder why, if the Greens are committed to the environment, they don't start by targeting housing utilisation. I voted for them, and I'm not sure if they're fair income.
What do you mean? What do you mean by housing utilisation?
Well, if you look at all the empty houses, you know, that they're built, you know, they're ready to move into, but for whatever reason, landlords that are too wealthy to rent them out, to need to rent them out, or whatever it is, you know, there's something going on, and or maybe there's a bit of a bubble of empty properties that, you know, I don't know. I feel like it's that's a core issue and the most urgent issue, and it's the most urgent fix.
It's a good observation, and you're not alone in making it, Charlie, that there are so many empty dwellings around the country, Keith Wolahan. Isn't there some policy setting, let's turn to your side of politics, that you've considered, or have you considered, that might open those up for usage?
It's a really good question, and whenever I door knock in my electorate, I am struck at the amount of houses that have letterboxes just stuffed with material, lawns that haven't been mowed. Clearly, no one lives there, but it's not being rented out either. There was an interesting story from Whitehorse, which overlaps with my seat. There was a Freedom of Information application by Councillor Blair Barker, and he wanted to know how many vacant houses were in that municipality and how many were being levied the vacant residential land tax. And I'm sort of using my memory here, but I think he found there was up to 8,000 vacant houses, and the tax was levied on, I think, less than 150. So we have these levers, but then there's a question.
Why is that?
It's a good question. It's a good question, and I would hate to think it's because someone can't find the owner or they haven't served paperwork on someone who doesn't reside in Australia. So Charlie raises a really good point, and I think it's something we need to turn our mind to in a serious way. I think the state and potentially federal levers we could look at.
Yes, and if it actually is turning out to be more profitable than putting in the money that you need to maintain a building correctly, to make sure it's safe, secure, heated, insulated, I mean, you need to change the settings, don't you? Because then you've got a really distorted housing market with perfectly good properties just lying fallow and empty.
Well, there's a broader issue here, which is that, I'm a liberal and I believe in the power of free markets to lead to good outcomes. But there is a limit to that when it comes to residential property. It can't just be an alternative to a Swiss bank account for offshore money to be used in the residential property market. It just can't be. This is about a roof over people's head. It's about income security as they age. So I think we need to be very protective of the importance of the residential property market.
Keith Wallahan is with you for a solo party line this morning. But I tell you what, if you're a Labor supporter, a member of the Labor Party, if you lean that way, you're welcome to call in, and you can be the voice of balance, if you like, or a Greens member as well, with Keith Wallahan this morning. David in Eltham, I think you're calling in about housing as well. Go ahead, David.
Oh, hi, Virginia and Keith. Look, I'm a residential property developer and a modular builder of residential homes. And I guess I just wanted to talk about two things on the supply side. It's okay to talk about, how many houses we need to build and build in a hurry. Having the resources to build those houses in a hurry is something that's not being talked about. And
what do you mean by resources when you say resources?
Trades, builders, materials, the whole lot. You try getting those trades right now, it's just about impossible. So you dump more demand on those industries, and it's just going to get harder. So there's a bigger issue there. But from a supply side, the single biggest problem I think we have is getting the approvals. And honestly, the councils have taken themselves off the table when it comes to handing out approvals and working through the approval process. They're not equipped to do it. They have an industrial scale machine inside of council that is designed for one thing and one thing only: kicking the can down the road and finding a way to say no so someone else can make the decision for them.
Do you like the idea that's been suggested of the council planning powers being brought back into a state government?
I think the theory is good. What I fear is it's going to become a high-vis and hard-hat photo op. That's about it. I really do fear that.
Michelle is back.
I've got a project.
Oh, great. Good to know.
I've got a project out at St Albans, that we've been trying to get a planning approval on for years. It is zoned for 200 dwellings. That's the minimum number of dwellings we've got to build there. We have plan after plan after plan after plan after plan.
I gotcha. David, nice to hear from you. Thank you. I think we have Michelle Anandaraja back. Is that right?
Hi, Virginia. Sorry, false alarm. A little bit breathless. Should have worn my runners.
I can hear you panting there. Push your chair back and just take a moment to breathe. It's all right. And, we have a rule actually in radio, which is it's good to share with you, which is you never run to a studio. No matter how late you are, never run to a studio, because what happens is when you get there, oh, here is hi, I'm Virginia Trioli. And so there's simply no point. You may as well get there late and let Jules, I don't know, play some music or something.
That should be a rule for the chamber as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that won't work for you. You have to run to the chamber. Yeah. Anything on that you want to say, Keith, about the suggestion here in Victoria, our state, to which we all belong, where we all live, about pulling those planning powers back to the state government?
No, I'm opposed to that. I mean, David comes from a beautiful area of Melbourne in Eltham, and the Nillumbik Council there know that area well. It's a green wedge of Melbourne. I would hate to think that planning decisions for where he lives are centralised in a government that doesn't know its community.
Yeah, well, I have some concerns about it as well. At the same time as I can see where it goes badly wrong with individual and sometimes idiosyncratic local council planning decisions too. So I don't know how you actually solve that. 1300 222 774. If you'd like to call in. Reese in South Morang, what would you like to say on the housing issue, Reese?
I'm just interested in why the Greens aren't, I guess, pushing the real systemic fix to this entire problem, which is the reason Shorten didn't get in. Changing the tax and, I guess, incentive structure. From what I recall of the political parties, the Greens on their declarations are fairly unencumbered by property rentals, a la, versus the Libs and even Labor having that. So it seems like a pretty impersonal thing that they could do, which they don't have the conflict. Everyone says that, oh no, politicians would never have conflict. They declared, but the reality is that them hidden in trust funds and all sorts of stuff. So I just don't understand why they're not using that.
That's absolutely right. I wanted to put that to you, Michelle Anandaraja, because it was interesting to read Ross Gittins in The Age yesterday, who issued a general apology to anyone who was younger than his generation, baby boomers, about how, in his view, we've stuffed it all up for anyone who's younger. And it made the point, really, by the arguments he was making, that virtually everything that was proposed by Bill Shorten when he was leader, leading into the election before, we look back now and go, if all of those changes had been made, we might right now, given everything we know and the cost of living challenge we're living through, we'd be in a better situation for first home buyers, for the property market, which is so distorted right now. Looking back, do you wish that the key planks in his policy platform had been more supported?
Sure, Virginia. I think there's a couple of points to be made. The first is that, and I think the listeners getting to the point of negative gearing, but there's a broader question around taxation reform, which has never really been addressed properly by either side of Parliament. But with negative gearing, as you know, it was taken to two elections, 2016, 2019, and it was rejected. It was rejected by the Australian people. Now, I voted Labor, but not enough people did. So we jettisoned that policy, and we're not relitigating it.
Is it time to have a different look at it? A look at it again, but through a different lens or differently constructed, grandfathered in a certain way that doesn't spook the horses in the way that the original policy did?
Sure. So, as you know, next month in August, we're going to be having our national conference. Now, this is the first time I'm attending. I'll be a delegate, so I have voting rights. And, as you know, and this is in the public domain, this particular issue is going to be discussed along with a million other issues. So, we'll be having our own internal discussion within the party around it. But we do realise that there is a problem here, but it doesn't detract from the central problem. Sorting out housing, right, only, and negative gearing in particular, basically will shift the dial towards owner-occupiers rather than renters, right? It moves that needle, but it doesn't change the underlying problem, which is one of supply. So our focus now as a government is in increasing supply, and we have at National Cabinet, the Prime Minister has charged the state housing ministers to essentially come up with a suite of solutions that is going to help us increase supply in as quick a time as possible. And that's where we speak about changing planning and zoning laws in order to deliver this quickly.
Keith Wallahan, looking at it as dispassionately as you can, is the idea of changing, altering, or even scrapping in some grandfathered way the negative gearing policy in this country, is that just political suicide for any party that wants to approach it?
Look, there's an obvious political dimension to this, but I'm a backbencher in the Liberal Party. I get a bit more freedom to talk about this. I think every lever should be on the table. I'm not going to announce tax changes here, but can I give a statistic to your listeners? Those aged between 30 and 34, in 1971, 64% were owning their own home. In 2021 census, it was 50%. We're seeing plummeting home ownership rates. Supply is very important. That's about build and also what population we have. But the mix is important too. About, if people want to move, and there's, we fully support people who are renting. I've been a renter myself, but people who want to transition to owning their own home, because the security that comes with that and owning your own bit of Australia, tax has a role to play in that. And I think, when it comes to something as serious as this, there should be no third rail in politics. We should put everything on the table and look at it dispassionately. And I hope when we look at this, we do that.
Keith Wallahan and Michelle Anandaraja are with you. Your party line is today. A couple of calls coming in. Let's go to those. And Larissa, you're from Lower Plenty, and yours is a bit more local for Keith, I think. Go ahead.
Oh, hi, everyone. I was just interested to hear from Keith what he thought about how prepared his electorate is for bushfire risk in the coming summers, and in particular with respect to roads and how people might have to escape their area if there is a fire.
Yeah, and it looks like he is in that neck of the woods, and it looks like we are considering or anticipating a pretty serious season. Keith, what's your understanding of preparedness in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, whenever we move from spring into summer, I turn my mind to that and think about the areas in my electorate, particularly of Warrandyte North, Wonga Park. For those in North Warrandyte in particular, they've got one main road in and out. There's 4 CFAs there. And
what's been done that you're aware of?
Well, what's been done, there was the bridge over Warrandyte, the Yarra River was upgraded, but I think it's not enough. The CFA captains in each of the 4 CFAs tell me when the weather gets to a certain temperature, they tell people to leave. They empty the schools go to somewhere else. And I think these are some of the lessons from places like Marysville in 2009. And it, I worry that could happen to the outer fringes of Melbourne.
Has there been any winter hazard reduction that you're aware of?
I think there has. The CFA are working year-round, and the SES assist as well. So they're very effective. But because it's an area where a lot of families move into, they find that their biggest task is re-educating families, because the best defence in a high fire risk day is for families and for everyone to leave the area.
Can I just jump in, Virginia? So as you know, the government stood up a new agency this year called the National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA for short, and it's got a wealth of material on it. It's worth, for those communities who are living in bushfire-prone areas or indeed flood-prone areas, to check it out and understand what you can do to prepare yourselves. And certainly this is front of mind for the government in ensuring we put more work into prevention. And it also speaks to an overarching agenda around climate change. We are now the first government that has actually landed a climate change policy. We've got legislated targets, which will take us to 82% renewables by 2030. And we're trying to do this at speed. And one of the key things that we have to address is actually connecting gigascale solar and wind to the electricity grid. And that means that we're trying to modernise the grid. And I know that there is some degree of community concern and apprehension around the poles and wires. But, we're working with communities. We want to hear them out. But I can't emphasise enough how important it is that we get those poles and wires up. Otherwise, we cannot get to our target. There is no point having 6 offshore wind zones and not connecting them to the grid. It is essential we get there.
We're out of time, so we'll have to leave it there. But Keith and Michelle, always grateful when you make time for us. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Virginia.
Thanks, Virginia. Thank you, Michelle.
Keith Wallahan, Liberal member for Menzies there, and Michelle Anandaraja, who's a Labor member for Higgins. Busy in Parliament House today, but made some time for us.